Necessary Evil of Nathan Miller. Book 2 in the Nightmares Trilogy. Written by Demelza Carlton. Autonarrated by AI Charlotte from Google. 71. Beach stars sand shot surf Chris Nathan I was floating. No pain, nothing holding me down anymore. Something cold touched my face and I opened my eyes slowly. I recoiled from the dark shape hovering over me. "It's okay. I'm just washing your face," said a voice I barely recognized. I shivered in what felt like a cold wind. It couldn't be. I looked around fearfully. I looked up, and saw the contrast of pinprick stars on the darker black of the open sky. "Where are we?" "We're at a beach, out of there, away from them." His voice sounded different, that was why I didn't recognize it immediately. More abrupt, more certain. More authoritative. "There's something I have to do here." "You got me out." "Thank you, Chris." I felt a surge of joy well up, bringing tears to my eyes, barely able to believe it was possible. He was silent, and I looked at him to see the reason for it. I was shocked to see he held my hands in his. I couldn't feel his touch, and they didn't look like my hands. They were twisted and swollen, dark with blood to well past my wrists. As he held my hands he said, "Can you trust me?" "Okay." I was surprised that he'd bothered to ask, after all that had happened. He suddenly turned to face the dunes, looking worried. "Wait here. I'll be back." He got up and jogged off into the dunes, leaving me alone. "First aid kit," were the only words I could discern as he took off. I tried to move but my body wouldn't respond. There was no feeling left in my legs, and my hands were numb from the wrists down. I tried to call out, to tell him to wait, not to leave me alone like this, but even my voice wasn't strong enough. Just as I started to panic, I heard footsteps approaching me across the sand. I struggled to sit up, realizing too late as I managed it that I was wrapped in a blanket, which slipped off my shoulders, exposing most of my top half to the freezing wind. I clumsily attempted to pull it back up again with my numb, mangled fingers, but failed miserably. Somehow I collapsed on the sand again, my head spinning. So cold already, I barely felt him rip the blanket away from me and toss it aside. I should have fought, but it was like moving through cold water, and I was so tired, so tired. "Sadistic prick," I mumbled. I couldn't even feel the pain anymore. I heard a voice, but I didn't care enough to focus on what it meant. I closed my eyes, drifting into sleep. A sharp pain woke me and I cried out, opening my eyes as I struggled to sit up, convinced I'd been stabbed. He pushed me back down, his voice an unintelligible sound that I couldn't focus on, but I fought him now, desperate to see if I'd dreamed it. Then he was gone. A gun in my hands. I couldn't feel it, had to touch it to my face to be sure I had it. "End it," I murmured. A gasp. "No." Tugging, snapping took it from me. The gun was gone. Shots. "Wake up, Angel." Nathan saying, "It's over." "Chris?" I mumbled. "It's all right, he's dead," Nathan replied. 72. Nathan dropped me off at home and I made vague excuses to get rid of him. I had a meeting with his boss, and I didn't want him involved in it. I hadn't told him I knew his secret, and I didn't want to yet. Not before I knew the whole story. His colleague Naveed drove me. He didn't say a word to me for the whole trip. I wondered if that was protocol or personal. He escorted me to the reception desk, where he handed me a visitor badge. "You need to sign in here and then I'll take you to see Mr. Mott." I lifted the pen to sign the visitor book. "Don't trust him." I looked up. "What did you say?" He pressed his lips together. "Sign in," he prompted. I finished signing in and clipped on my badge as I followed him into the small office area. ASIO didn't have a very big presence in Perth, presumably the rest of their operations were in Canberra. The office belonged to Paul Mott, it said so on the door. Naveed knocked cautiously on the glass and was told to come in. He cracked the door open and ushered me inside, closing it behind me. "So you're the girl my team has been babysitting," Mott said with a wide smile, holding out his hand to shake mine. I inclined my head and didn't offer him my fingers. He looked like the type who'd crush them in what bastards like him called a firm handshake, but was more like an attempt to break the other man's fingers first. As Naveed had advised, I didn't trust a man whose smile didn't reach his eyes. He recovered quickly. "Have a seat," he said, waving at the one in front of his desk. "The client's chair, of course." He ensconced himself in his throne behind the desk. I didn't tell him I had the same sort of desk chair in my music room. "Now, what was it you wanted to discuss with me?" He arranged his face in another insincere smile. "Why are your team babysitting me?" I asked bluntly. "I'd have thought that was obvious," he drawled. "You've been the victim of violence, and my team are doing their best to ensure it doesn't happen again." "I don't buy it," I responded. "ASIO doesn't care about a bunch of rapists and perverts kidnapping a girl. And most ASIO operatives don't carry weapons. Even the police wouldn't assign me a guard when someone broke into my house. Your team was there and didn't prevent the break-in either." His face gradually developed 2 pink spots on his cheeks, reddening as I continued. "ASIO wouldn't hire Nathan Miller. He has too personal a stake in this. And he's trying to get information out of me, but he's so clumsy at it, I find it hard to believe he's ever done this before." I wet my lips. "So, why are your team babysitting me?" He hesitated. "Protecting you until Nathan gets your valuable information, as you put it." "Do you think he'll get it?" His eyes darted away before returning to me. "Do you?" He countered. I laughed. A politician's answer from the prick. "Perhaps," I replied. I leaned forward. "What will you do if you don't get it?" "We can't keep babysitting you forever. Sooner or later I'll reassign resources to where the need is greater." I decided to try being nice. "It might help if you told me exactly what you need. I mean, I can remember a lot of things. The people who were there the day I was kidnapped. What happened on the beach before and after the police arrived. You telling Nathan not to let the police know things when I was in hospital." I watched him carefully and was rewarded with a shocked glance before he regained his composure. My suspicion grew. Mott was the bastard who'd sent the message to Nathan's phone. "Standard practice in counter-terrorism," he blustered. "I wouldn't expect a young girl like yourself to know anything about national security." "No?" I interrupted. "Then why am I their target?" "I have no idea," he replied smoothly as if he expected the question. From the blankness of his expression, I guessed that this was an outright lie. "You tell me. Tell me everything you remember, from the number plate of their car to the size of each dick they shoved up your ass. Tell me that, and maybe we can catch them. Or I'll assign your babysitters to more important duties and leave you to be raped to death by the terrorists you know are hunting you." I swallowed, trying to wrap my head around his offensive, hate-filled threat. I had to, or lose my chance to find out what happened. "Does that include Nathan Miller? Is he operating completely under your orders?" He didn't meet my eyes for a moment, so I knew the words he uttered next weren't entirely true. "Yes. Everything Nathan does is in response to a direct order." He laughed and flashed his insincere smile. "Why did you think he loved you? He's our best interrogator because he'll sleep with the ugliest hag to earn her trust." I heard his informant was hardly a hag, a really hot dominatrix. I bet he had fun. You must have been a real disappointment after her, he sneered. I didn't expect he'd sink low enough to seduce a child, but he rose to the occasion like no one else. Call of Duty. He shrugged. Oh God, he'd slept with Laura too. Who didn't she sleep with? Breathe. Even if this was the man who'd tried to get me killed, I couldn't kill Nathan's boss. Not yet, anyway. What will you do if I give you my memories? Everything written down in as much detail as even you could want? I asked evenly. His smile set my teeth on edge. Why, then you'd be doing your country a great service. I laughed. The country thanks me. No, I said, what will you do? I'll help you disappear into witness protection, so you'll never need ASIO babysitters again. I stared at him. You mean, leave my life, my family, everything? What kind of life is that? One you get to live, he replied smoothly. You're young enough to transfer to another university in another city, without damaging your career. It's not as if you have a lot of family here, relocation won't be hard for you. And of course you'll change your name. What about my musical career? My band? I blurted out, horrified. His eyebrows rose. I'm sure you can find some musicians in another city who'd be happy to play with you. He shrugged. I jumped to my feet. Music isn't a hobby, like photography or writing stories, we're a band. We've written songs together and we perform them. We have gigs lined up here in Perth. I can't just leave that. If you want me to kiss my whole life goodbye and make me start over in a new city, you're going to do the same for the rest of my band. Hell, I'd want a signed recording contract before I'd agree to that. He laughed unpleasantly. Do you have such a contract now? No, I admitted. But I never will if we have to start over. It took years to get enough exposure here for paid gigs. In a new city, who knows how long it'd take? No. I won't go into witness protection. I'll take my chances with my life here. Nathan won't let anything happen to me. Miller will work on whatever case he's ordered to. He's not your personal bodyguard. He stared at me like a snake, not blinking at all. I have it on good authority that some of your attackers remain free. Are you willing to take your chances with them? I swallowed. I wanted a heavily armed chance with Nathan for backup. Alone and without him, I might not stand a chance at all. Nathan swore he wouldn't let them hurt me. I believe him. He laughed, taking his time before he sobered, and said, very sweet. And you believed him? So all your injuries, the ones he failed to prevent, don't hurt at all? You fucking bastard. You ordered him to stand by and do nothing while they raped me. Tears burned my eyes, but I didn't dare shed them in front of this prick. I tried to keep my voice steady. If I go into witness protection, it'll only be with my band and a recording contract. I'm not asking for an advance, royalties only. I'll even pay for the recording studio for the first album. He shook his head. You can't hide in witness protection and be a pop star. It doesn't work like that. I pressed my lips together. Do you honestly think my band is the next One Direction? I'll write you a list of indie recoding labels we'll consider, based on their distribution and touring capability. I just want to make a living while I'm at uni. If you prefer, we can discuss ex gratia payments for people who have been significantly inconvenienced by government. I heard people who have been wrongfully imprisoned can get millions in compensation. I watched him grow pale. Apparently young girls like myself normally didn't do their fucking homework either. I'll change my name, move to a new city and study there. But only with my band and a contract with an independent music label. Not enough, he replied. What about your memories? If you want all that, I want a full account of everything you remember in relation to the terror suspects and your captivity. In writing. Then I want our arrangement in writing too, with details of the recording contract as part of the agreement, I countered. We can discuss that at a later date when you provide said information, he said smoothly, rising to his feet. Thursday, I replied, remaining seated. It was time to seriously look at those media offers. If ever I needed a bargaining chip, it was now. I didn't trust him. He looked surprised for a moment, but his hesitation didn't last long. Maybe I should have asked for more. Thursday, he repeated. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. Naveed waited beside the reception desk. Sign out, turn in your visitor badge and I'll take you home, he said. We'd been driving for perhaps 2 minutes when he asked, Did you get what you came for? Some of it, I answered. I hesitated. Is he that rude to everyone? Naveed glanced at me and laughed. He's not polite, that's for sure. I wet my lips. I couldn't take Mott down by myself and he wouldn't physically attack me, so I could kill him in self-defense. Nor would Nathan do it for me. I needed Naveed's help to get Mott charged for his crimes. He knew things I've never told anyone. Things that happened while they held me captive. The only person who could have told him is dead. Something's not right. Naveed frowned as he looked out of the windscreen at the traffic. I know he's rude, but to say he's consorting with terrorists is quite an accusation for someone as high up in ASIO as he is. I know, I replied in a small voice. That's why I'm telling you and not making a formal accusation. You told me not to trust him. I don't. He's dodgy and someone needs to find out how he knows these things. I'll keep an eye out, Miss Lockyer, he said. But it's not your problem anymore. You should focus on recovering and getting on with your own life. Catching terrorists is our job. Mutely I nodded while crossing my fingers. I'd planted the seed and I only hoped it would take root and flower. If I had my botany right, this was going to be a big stinking Rafflesia, a corpse flower. 73. Hello? I answered cautiously, holding the phone receiver to my ear. Miss Lockyer. This is Detective McGuinness. I'm sorry I didn't get back to you sooner about the break-in at your house. I managed to pick up a cold somewhere. And just as I thought I was fine, my wife caught it too, and she was in bed for a solid week. She couldn't do anything. I even had to take the kids to school, cook dinner, do all the cleaning. I don't know how nurses do it. I've been on chicken soup and tissues duty for a week. It's a relief to be back at work. I hope everyone's okay now, I replied politely, wondering what he wanted. Back at work and all, he said. But I didn't call to talk about me. I wanted to know if anything else had happened since the break-in. Did you notice anything missing, or anything in the house that shouldn't be? Had any further intruders? I hesitated. Nathan hadn't said anything about keeping Laura's attack secret, but if he hadn't told the police how he and I'd killed 4 people between us that night, I couldn't just blurt it out. No intruders after last week, I answered truthfully. I didn't have to mention that they'd come back 2 days running last week. You keep a lookout, and call me if you see anything suspicious, he insisted. It'd be a hell of a relief if there was anything else you could tell me about what you remember from your captivity. Stuff we could use to track them down, so you wouldn't have to worry about an attack. I've been writing down a little of what I remember, I replied cautiously. I could give you a copy on CD when I see you next. That'd be a great help, he said. I'll have to get back to you on when I can meet with you again. I seem to be snowed under in the office. You'd think I'd been on holidays instead of homesick. We both said polite goodbyes and ended the call. I headed back to my room to finish off the Nightmares file, so I could give copies to everyone who seemed to want my memories. One version for the police and Mott, which didn't include a single mention of Chris. From the police to the judge, just like I promised. One complete version for Nathan, omitting nothing. I paused for a moment. There was one thing I wanted to keep from Nathan if I could. He felt guilty enough now with his vague knowledge of what they'd done. He didn't need to know explicit details. I took out every mention of rape and replaced it with other words for the same thing. Torture. They hurt me. Pain, but never admitted to him that they raped me. I imagined the look on his face if he read it, and removed the lot. He knew. He didn't need to be reminded. I hoped he never read it. I set a copy of Nathan's version to print too, just in case something went wrong with the data copy. A hard copy backup, I wasn't taking any chances. Just as the first page hummed off the printer, I heard Joe's car pull up, perfectly on time. I headed for the front door to let her in, then led the way back to my room. My work was only half done. So, what are you doing? Jo asked, seating herself on my bed. I squinted at the screen. I've been writing down the details of everything they did to me, so I can give it to ASIO and the police. Now I'm checking my emails to see how much I can sell the story for. You're selling your story? To who? She squealed. I grimaced. I haven't decided yet. This one's offering the most money, but they want to interview Nathan as well as me. I'm not sure if that's a good idea. She clapped her hands like an excited child. Are you serious? It's a brilliant idea. Hell, I'd pay to see his face when you tell people on live television how much of a pervert he is. I still don't understand how you can stand to have him around after all he did to you. You know there's a condition called Stockholm Syndrome that you should really read up on. I stopped dead and grabbed her shoulders so we were face to face. Listen to me. Nathan Miller never hurt me, not once. He may have stuffed up a bit and let other people hurt me more than he should, but he's paid for it. He really did save my life, Joe. I'd be dead if it weren't for him. I itched to tell her the whole story, but I stood by my word as Nathan stood by his. Now, if only he'd stand by long enough to do this interview, I'd have the money to start a new life, far from here and the memories of pain. She stared at me as if trying to read my thoughts. I hope she couldn't, my head held more darkness than she should see. I want to believe you, she said finally. Before this, I'd swear you're telling the truth. Now I feel like you're hiding something. Fine. Fine. But if I'm supposed to be nice to him as your boyfriend, I won't stand and watch if he hurts you. I'll break both his kneecaps if he so much as thinks about hurting you. I smiled weakly. Thanks, Joe. If he hurts me, you can get in line. I'll castrate him first, and if I leave him alive, then it's your turn. She laughed. That I believe. Though I think you're too nice to kill him. I'll help you if the time comes. I forced a smile. Jo didn't know I was already a killer, and she didn't need to either. So how much are you selling your soul for? She asked, bouncing back onto the bed. My story, I corrected, tapping the screen. This one is offering $2 million for an exclusive interview with Nathan and I, photos, recorded TV interview, and all magazine coverage. She whistled. Seriously? Take it, take it. With that much money, you could finish your degree without having to work part-time, plus you could even record an album if you wanted to. If only Nathan will agree. I mused. Test him. Tell him it's a test of his love or commitment or whatever, she suggested. I shrugged. I'll try. Hey, I've been working on some new songs while I've been stuck at home. Part of my physio exercise is daily piano practice, and Nathan inspired this one. I led the way to the music room and lifted the lid on the piano. It's called Necessary Evil. A smile spread across her face, widening as I played the opening notes of what definitely wasn't a love song. 74. Beach ambulance sound shot surf road Nathan numb. So cold. So tired. He made me drink something full of sugar and bubbles. He asked me irrelevant questions, but he wouldn't even tell me his name. Shouts and lots of people on the beach. After so much darkness, their bright torches were more than my eyes could handle. Blindly, I clung to him. Don't leave me blind, alone and helpless with strangers. I've had more of that than I can take. My eyes filled with tears, the torch beams shimmering and fracturing through them, but I fought to stop them from falling. I could feel him standing up, lifting me in his arms. I couldn't let go of him. He was the rock holding me steady in this universe of whirling, erratic stars. I could feel his footsteps on the beach sand, then the sudden jarring of each step as we reached the bitumen. After only a few steps on the road, bright light exploded overhead. I squinted, trying to adjust to this brightness that hurt my eyes, as Nathan gently set me down on something soft. The feeling of cool, crisp fabric on my exposed skin. I tried to look, but the white sheet blinded me, reflecting the beam from above. Nathan's gentle hands helped me lie down. My vision blurred as I looked right at the fluorescent light on the ceiling. Then he leaned over me, his face mercifully blocking the worst of it, with the remainder haloing his head like my own personal guardian angel. As if he took this role seriously, he told me, "You're going to be all right." His voice cracked as he said it, as if he was trying to convince himself. I smiled at him. Of course I'm going to be all right. I wanted to hug him and tell him thank you, but he moved and the light blinded me again, my eyes watering. By the time I blinked the tears away, an ambulance officer had usurped his place. Where is he? I asked this new stranger. He pulled on gloves. I shrank away from the very thought of him touching me, of anyone touching me. His voice tried to soothe me as he held his hands up in a gesture of polite surrender. It's all right. The police have him now. They'll arrest him and lock him in a cell where he won't be able to hurt you. And when he goes to prison, do you know what happens to child molesters and rapists? The other prisoners think they're the lowest of the low. He'll get a bit of his own medicine, and if you're lucky he might not even make it out alive. He sounded pleased at the thought of what awaited the man who'd hurt me. My response was angry. No. He never hurt me. They can't send him to prison. He never hurt me. 75. Let the world know he's the hero who saved my life. Whatever else he did doesn't matter now. I gave my word. I focused on slowing my breathing for the drive to the TV station. Nathan talked non-stop, but I didn't listen to him. I had to try and keep the story straight in my head, without opening the dark cesspool of memories. Today I'd tell a story that was only based in truth, the story people wanted to hear. Some of Nathan's words started to sink in. If you've had enough, end it. Remember what you're protecting him from. A small price to pay for his protection, as long as it's needed. If you've had enough, end it before you can say too much about how it ended. I let Nathan guide me into the building, my thoughts so full I moved on autopilot. Can I help you? A bored-looking receptionist asked when we stopped by her desk. It's time. Realization rocked me, and I had to place both hands on her desk to stay standing. She looked at my hands with disgust, as if they marred the marble with the slightest touch. She had no idea just how deep the taint ran. To the depths of my very soul, if I even had one. I'm Caitlin Lockyer, I said calmly. I waited for her eyes to widen as she realized I wasn't simply a child with dirty hands but a dark denizen of realms she could only imagine in her worst nightmares. She didn't disappoint. FFF, follow me please, she stuttered, tottering forward on her impossibly high heels into the studio. "You'll need to go to makeup before your interview and wardrobe too." Her jerky movements betrayed her fear. "Nathan, I need your help today, more than ever. Don't let me out of your sight." I took his proffered arm and hoped I wouldn't have to let go. Hope lasted less than a minute. The round woman was only a tiny bit taller than me, but she looked twice my weight. She directed Nathan to a makeup artist, leaving me standing without support in the middle of the room. A gleeful girl started working on him. Wondering who would work on me, I was surprised to find that I had not one, but three. "Get her undressed," the woman in charge ordered. "Get her undressed and you know what to do next." "No." A sob threatened to escape from my throat, as I tried to focus on anything but the abyss of memory before me. An unfamiliar hand with long nails touched my arm. "We're going to make you look absolutely beautiful for your interview, hon. New clothes, makeup and everything. But first we have to get these clothes off you," she murmured. "We have to get these clothes off you. Then I have to." Darkness and dreams. Stronger than me. Hands beneath my shirt that I was powerless to push away. Trust turned to panic, but it was too late. "No, please, please don't." "Nathan." His hands were warm around mine. His lips were warmer still as he kissed me softly. I swallowed my scream. "Safe." I froze as his fingers moved to unbutton my shirt, bearing me to everyone. "You don't have to do this," he murmured. "You don't have to do this." "I do." "Yes, I fucking well do. Let them see my scars. They barely scratch the surface, for the damage runs deep." I held still as Nathan took my shirt off. I stood rigid in the middle of the room and no one said a word. Nathan dropped his hands lower. "No, I can do this," I warned him, stripping down to my underwear. The horror on his face spun around the room, from one gasping girl to another. "Don't push me. You have no idea what I've been through." A dress was passed from hand to hand until Nathan slipped it over my head. No one else wanted to touch me. I understood. Nathan would, because he had no choice. The wrap dress was beyond him, but I didn't move to assist him. It hung half open when he threw his hands up in despair. "May I?" one of the girls asked. I nodded once and her deft hands quickly repaired the damage, tying the dress in a tight bow at my hip. "Are you sure?" Nathan asked. "Shit, Nathan. It's hard enough telling myself I can do it, without you doubting me." I took a deep breath and let it out before I lost it. I told him I was. I told him I knew what I was doing. I told him to get ready for the interview. And then my courage failed. I couldn't do this alone. "I need you," I admitted. I wasn't sure if he heard. Nathan turned away from me to return to his makeup artist. My knees shook as my legs started to ache from standing so long. "Sit down, hon," one of the girls whispered, escorting me to the makeup chair beside Nathan. He turned to me, excitement making his eyes shine beneath his light coat of eyeliner. I felt his fingers close over mine. "Close your eyes, sweet. It's my turn to make you look even more beautiful than you do already." My grip tightened on Nathan's fingers as I obeyed her. Nathan's hand slipped from mine and I heard the swish of fabric before he enveloped my hand in both of his. He kissed my fingers and started to apologize. I cut him off, not wanting to cry with so much makeup on. I waited impatiently for the woman to finish painting me, so I could get this over with. Finally, she told me she was done. My eyes flew straight to Nathan. My reflection wasn't important, would he support me? His smile said yes. I managed to force out a smile of my own as I thanked him. I stood up unsteadily and one of the girls sprang to my assistance. I endured her touch, but still I reached desperately for Nathan. It wasn't until he took my arm, giving me the support I needed, that I followed a man in black into the studio. 76. I eyed off the armchairs, wanting to sag into one and knowing that I couldn't. I had to sit with perfect posture and poise, as if this was a job interview. In a way, perhaps it was. "Grab a seat," our escort directed, listening to something over his headset. He waved at the chairs and walked away. I carefully sat down in the middle chair, where I'd be facing front. The same girl who'd fixed my dress helped me smooth my skirt. "Good luck," she whispered. I managed to smile in response. I glanced at Nathan to my right. His smile seemed as rigid as mine, and his hand tightened over my fingers. Wonderful. My support was as scared as I was. We were screwed. They wouldn't believe a word of our story, and a few well-placed questions would pick it apart like frayed Hessian. The interviewer gave a little cough to draw my attention from Nathan. I took a deep breath and turned my head toward her. From start to finish, it was a carefully scripted exchange, though it followed my script more than the interviewer's one. I wondered if a soap opera like Home and Away was more realistic. "What were you thinking most in The Pain and the Dark?" she asked. Her fake sympathy set my teeth on edge. I summoned a sad little smile. "I wanted to kill them all," I began. I felt considerable satisfaction at her shock. But I knew I couldn't. I sighed deeply, as if it was my deepest regret. She gaped for a few seconds before moving on to the next question. I behaved myself this time, responding with the carefully crafted responses that turned me into a tragic heroine, rescued by Nathan, the big alpha male hero, like they wanted. It was entertainment, not real. Nathan stumbled a little over his responses to the first couple of questions, before he fell into his stride. I listened to every word, alert for the tiniest slip that I'd have to step in and correct. Even when he started describing the beach where he'd found me, his description sounded real. Real to everyone but me, for I remembered a clearer picture than he outlined. So did he, I was certain. Nathan's eyes landed on me and I heard his paean of praise for his plucky little princess. "She's amazing. No matter how much pain she was in, she never stopped fighting to live, to get better. Anything else would mean they'd won." One glance at the interviewer told me his words didn't help build my image as a fragile little fainting blossom. Before he could say anything else he shouldn't, or the interviewer could open her mouth to ask another question, I chose to be cruel. In the same voice I'd used when I'd uttered those fateful words on the beach, I whispered, "End it." Nathan froze silent and wide-eyed. I felt sorry for him, but it did the trick. He announced that the interview was over and helped me to my feet. The black-clad man with the headset pursed his lips up in a kiss, his wide eyes fixed on me as he pointed at us. I nodded and guided Nathan into a classic pose, seen in a million movies where the hero kisses the girl. And kiss me he did, until the cameraman told us he'd had enough. Keeping with the fainting flower persona, I leaned heavily on Nathan as we were escorted back to makeup to dress in our own clothes again. I felt like I couldn't breathe freely until we left the TV studio and stood in the sun outside. "You did it," he said in wonder. "We did," I replied. Miss Lockyer. Miss Lockyer." The receptionist ran out of the building. "You forgot this." She handed me an envelope, smiling at me. "You were really brave in there. I hope you're happy together." She scurried back inside. I ripped open the envelope, knowing what was inside, but needing to check. The first tear revealed the word "million" on the check. I didn't need to read the rest to know it was enough. "What is it?" Nathan asked, curious. "Our check from the TV station for the interview. Would you like to know how much heroism like yours is worth? Half of this is yours, Nathan." He shook his head, waving the paper away. No. All of it belongs to you. I did the interview to help you. I don't need any payment for it. It doesn't matter how much it is, it'll never be enough to pay for your pain. He looked like it pained him to say it. Damn right. No amount of money can pay for pain. But it could help a tiny bit to take my mind off it. 77. Ambulance shots road police blood Nathan numb. I pushed hard and sat up, sliding my numb legs to the end of the tiny stretcher, until they dangled out of the ambulance door. What are you doing? You need to rest. The paramedic raised his voice, laying his hands on my shoulders, trying to make me lie down again. I shook him off, shuddering at the touch of a stranger. Without him, I'd be surrounded by strangers again. Can't. Won't let them hurt me again. I shoved the blankets away from me and dropped from the end of the stretcher to the road. I wore nothing but the huge blood-stained shirt, but I didn't feel the cold now. My rage heated my blood to boiling in my chest. I couldn't feel my feet or my legs, it felt like they'd fallen asleep. I wobbled a little, but I took a shuffling step, my toes curling and dragging on the road. And another step. I could see a police officer pushing him into the back of a patrol car. No! I shouted. Don't take him away from me. I reached for him, even though he was on the other side of the road from where I stood. Both he and the police officer heard and turned to look at me. There was a brief scuffle before Nathan pelted toward me. I managed 2 more shambling steps before the prone police officer started shouting at Nathan, telling him to stop or he'd shoot. Not to touch me or he'd shoot. No! I screamed out as I took 1 more step. This time I stumbled and fell to my knees. Nathan was there. He dropped into a crouch to help me back up to my feet. I wobbled a little again, as the officer fired. 78. This has got to be a joke. I threw the papers down on the table. This isn't what we agreed. There aren't any conditions on it. And my new name? What in hell do you think you're doing? I tried not to shout, but it came out louder than I'd intended. Fury does that to a girl. I'm running an anti-terrorism unit is what I'm fucking doing. And if you think this is how the negotiation is going to go, you can fucking leave. Beneath his dark hair, his dark eyes flashed, his face heating up. I crossed my legs and sat up straighter in the visitor chair on the client's side of the desk. He hadn't even offered me a drink of water, the prick. Well, you're fucking incompetent then. I smiled sweetly. You sent an operative who's clearly suffering from insomnia and the worst case of post-traumatic stress I've ever seen into a dangerous undercover operation. And an innocent bystander gets beaten and raped, almost to her death, as a result. You're not innocent. You killed 2 people, he spat. First the bloke on the beach and then his wife. I'd have loved to chalk up a 3rd right then and there. I shrugged. In self-defense. They wouldn't have died if you hadn't let them hurt me in the first place. Don't you pin Miller's incompetence on me, he blustered. He reports to you. You signed off on his fucking competence for the operation. How much training has he had? Mott wouldn't meet my eyes. How much? He's a contractor. He only needed a very basic orientation. His voice was very quiet. I knew it. I shot to my feet. You mean you sent an untrained civilian against the bastards who hurt me? And after he'd completely failed to stop my kidnapping, you assigned him to protect me? Where do you get off with this kind of incompetence? Seriously, if you're the best it has, ASIO is screwed. We should put up a sign, terrorists welcome. Come rape our women and children and mess with the minds of our men. His breathing was heavy and his eyes were on the desk. "I can have you charged for terrorist activity, and you'll never go home again." I snorted. "What will you charge me with? Calling you an incompetent wanker? I bet your staff do that on a daily basis." "You killed 2 terror suspects who were wanted for interrogation. They must have known something you didn't want ASIO to hear," he replied weakly. I leaned over the desk so I could meet his eyes. "Yeah, they knew what it felt like to rape me while I was helpless to stop them. That's something no one wants to hear unless you get off on that sort of thing." "You were part of Al-Hamar," he insisted. I stopped dead. "Where did you hear that name?" That was what Laura had called Nathan. He was as crooked as the rest of them. I wondered if it was just the sex or if she'd paid him in money too. She can't have been that good in bed. It must have been a lot of money. His grin was fierce. "That's the name of your terrorist group, isn't it? I'm onto you, you little bitch." I laughed. No one calls a terrorist group Al-Hamar, least of all the people in it, unless they're a bunch of asses. Don't you have an Arabic translator? My Arabic's bad, but even I know what that means. He jumped to his feet. Now his face was red. "ASIO do not negotiate with terrorists. You can't blackmail me into a recording contract for you and your band. Public celebrity isn't part of witness protection. You'll go into witness protection quietly or I'll—" "You'll what?" I asked. "I like my life as it is. The people who hurt and hunted me are all dead. I'm not at risk anymore. If you want me to go into hiding as a favor to you, then you'll deliver the modest conditions I asked for. And a couple more. No normal ASIO staff member would agree to this. If he did, he had a hell of a lot to hide. Like Laura." "What else do you want?" He looked ready to explode. "You're going to arrange a television appearance for my band. Then you'll see if anyone notices it's the same girl in my exclusive interview and the music performance. Hell, make sure the band appearance is the same day they air my interview. I bet no one notices." I kept my eyes on him. "You're not giving a television interview on a matter of national security. I won't let you, you little—" I cleared my throat. "Little tragic heroine, little rape victim, little innocent who suffered as a result of your incompetence? It's not only bought and paid for, it's done." And Nathan sat beside me answering questions too. "You little Arab bitch. My mother was Persian. You want to get racist about this? I'll report you and get you dismissed. Maybe I should add that to what I tell the press. Racist ASIO staff, verbally abusing the tragic little heroine." I watched the words sink in. "That's right." He swallowed, sitting down heavily. "So you gave a fucking television interview? And he did too. What did you say?" Nathan came out looking like a bigger hero than Superman. As for my interview questions, I smiled. "I don't believe I have to tell you that." "Like hell you don't," he exploded. He rose to his feet, and leaned over like he was trying to intimidate me. Maybe before my abduction it might have worked. Somewhere along the line my fear had died. Anger burned in its place. This bastard had sold both Nathan and I to Laura. I regarded him calmly. "That's right, I don't work for you. I don't have to keep anything confidential because all of your so-called terrorists are dead. All but one, I thought but didn't say. So you can make a deal with me for whatever I'm willing to tell you, and my silence after that, or you can find out from the front cover of tomorrow's West, the same as everyone else." He thumped down in his chair, glowering as he picked up the pen. "Your demands then?" I ticked them off my fingers as I recited them. First, the contract and television appearance. For the band, of course, not me as an individual. Medical school and a new name. And then there's the matter of Nathan Miller. Nathan's our top undercover interrogator. He goes as deep as he needs to in order to get whatever we need. He's not going to take a bribe from you. He dismissed me with a flick of his fingers. I frowned. He was damaged when you took him on, and he's worse after working for you. What about counseling, helping him find another job? He shouldn't be working on this case or any case like it. He took on the job knowing the risks. That's not my problem. I smiled. Did he really know the risks? Did he know you'd order him to do whatever it took, including making him hurt another girl the same way they killed his sister? His eyes held a touch of fear. He knew when he took the job. He agreed to do anything he had to in order to save his sister. What are you complaining about? He got you out alive. My words came out bitter. You know what he did. He was acting under your orders. That's bullshit. He was supposed to watch them kidnap you and take them into custody. Instead, he disappeared. When he turned up 3 weeks later, it was in a police report with your half-dead body. We had to cover up the mess from whatever he'd done while he was AWOL, he insisted. I shook my head. Either he's obeying orders or he's a rogue. You can't have both. I was never the target, it was him they wanted. They set him up to take the blame for a hate crime against a Persian girl. Me. He was always the target. I saw from the way his eyes flickered that he knew. And you sent him to his death. Was he just bait to catch your suspects, or did they get to you and offer you something for him? They didn't want to kill him. They threatened his sister so he'd cooperate, but she was never really in any danger. They wanted to turn him into a racist rapist. Then they'd let him kill himself. She didn't. That's bullshit, he stammered. He knew she was in charge. Fuck, he really was one of Laura's bastards. He sold Nathan to her. And me. He fucking sold us like pieces of meat. They didn't even know my name, I said softly. Nathan wasn't supposed to survive, was he? You know, deliberately sending one of your staff to die can land you in jail under the occupational health and safety laws. I'd say negligence doesn't cut it here, in your case it'd be murder. But all that goes away if you give him an office job, far from here in this case, like he should have been in the first place. He's so damaged he can't see you're responsible for the mess in his head, but I can. He needs intensive therapy because he's not safe the way he is. You need to reassign him to some other government department where the most traumatic thing he has to deal with is a paper jam in the printer. I wanted to cross my fingers, knowing that his bigger crime was a matter of national security and nothing to do with safety laws at all. But I didn't dare say it. If he knew, he might risk killing me himself. I needed him angry enough not to think straight, but not angry enough to kill. A hell of a balance for a girl who struggled to walk straight. He stared at me. I can't. With his successes on this case, his application for operative training has been approved. Full training and a 5-year contract. A television interview will seal the deal, making him a public hero and our best interrogator. There'll be girls paying to get into his pants, and they'll tell him anything just like you did. No. Not Nathan. He wouldn't make it through training and more of this work, it'd kill him or drive him mad. What would happen to him without me? Nathan's in more danger than I am, you know he is. This bunch might be dead, but whoever hired them might hire more. He's the one you should send into witness protection, to protect him. Nathan is part of the deal or I'll have none of it. First you want your band and now you want to take Miller as your gigolo? Everyone knows you've been fucking him. No wonder he's the best undercover operative we have, he's been busy lubricating your cunt. pumping you for information the best way he knows how. He won't turn down the job he's always wanted just to keep fucking a damaged little slut like you. You can shove your deal where you let terrorists shove their. I stood calmly, wanting to gut the man but restraining myself. I think you should apologize for that, as a very small beginning. Suggesting I asked to be raped will sink your career like a bad radio DJ. Especially if I leave here and ring the press with the other half of my story. ASIO agents deliberately letting me get hurt so they can catch their suspects, active participants in the abuse, callous about my injuries. Whether I have or haven't engaged in sexual intercourse with Nathan is none of anyone's business, least of all yours. But I will tell you for free that I'll never sleep with a man who raped me, no matter what his reasons were. You should check out your surveillance people if they tell you otherwise. You little bitch. I inclined my head. That's what the so-called terrorists called me and they died for it. Are you threatening me? He spat. I smiled again. Finally, you understand. Yes. Prison, losing your job, possible terror charges, and death. These are all very real threats, and I don't have to be alive to carry them out. I've made some very detailed accounts, entrusting them to people who will release them to the media if I meet with a mishap. I slapped a CD case on the desk. This is what I'll be giving to the police tomorrow. It's what you've been trying to get Nathan to find out from me, though it's not a complete account by any means. You'll find the dates and requirements for the TV appearance and recording contract on there too. You have until close of business tomorrow to let me know the details. Or you get to find out what rape's like in prison, because I remember everything that happened. Plenty more that's not on that CD. And if Nathan raped me on your orders, I'll pay your cellmate to do the same to you 10 times over for every time he did it to me. I glared at him, praying he wouldn't call my bluff. I knew Nathan had done no such thing, but I hoped Mott didn't. Fucking Miller. I knew he couldn't keep it in his pants. He swallowed and reached for the CD. No, wait. Honestly, I can do all of it, except for the bits involving Miller. He'd have to give up his whole career. That's not my call to make. And he'll never do it, not for you. He won't give up everything he's worked so hard for to spend all his life with you and a shrink. He didn't know Nathan. I shook my head. No deal. If he raped you, why in hell would you let him anywhere near you? He asked suddenly. I thought fast. He did what he had to. No cruelty, no more pain than necessary. Always because of his orders. And the guilt of what he had to do on those orders eats him up inside, so he'd do anything for me to make up for it. Even kill for me. I gritted my teeth. He knows he owes me. I want him to pay his debt. And just in case I'm wrong, I want to know where he is. I don't want to be looking over my shoulder, worrying where he might be. I held his gaze until he looked away. He swallowed a couple of times. When he did speak, he sounded desperate. All your other conditions fine, but all I can do is present your offer to Miller. Whether he agrees to counseling and taking an office job near you, or the successful career he's earned is up to him. But I didn't have to ask him to do that. You're going to give him the ultimatum, you prick. I wished I could see his face. I wet my lips. Slowly, I nodded. Nathan had a choice after all, and forcing his boss to make my offer sounded like fun to me. Proper payback for being a prick. Put it all in writing and I'll consider it. I stood up. One thing though. If Nathan's sister really was in danger, and you believed him when your top interrogator told you she was their next target, why didn't she have anyone guarding her? Why was I the one being babysat? I didn't wait for an answer. Instead, I left, closing the door carefully behind me. The walls weren't thick enough to prevent me from hearing his final word on the matter. Farg. I smiled. I didn't think he'd keep his job long enough to follow through on all of it, but I was counting on the band arrangements and Nathan. After all, if he was stupid enough to leave evidence on Nathan's phone, surely Asio could find enough to arrest him. Naveed drove me home from this meeting too. Making him angry will only mean trouble, he said as soon as the building was out of sight. I shrugged. He called me a terrorist, an Arab bitch, a slut, and damaged besides. He also suggested I'd invited rape. Before he accused me of being a member of a terrorist group called Al-Hamar. Naveed laughed. He called you Al-Hamar? What an ass. We really need to get a translator. Oh, I'm sorry. The rest isn't funny, but that? He collected himself. For the rest, I'll report him. That's not acceptable. Don't give him any information, keep it to yourself until we get this sorted. I already gave him a copy of everything I remembered, what Nathan's been trying to get out of me, I admitted. Naveed shook his head. You shouldn't have done that. Several records of interrogations have disappeared in this case, including ones on Laura, the woman who died, I supplied. He knew things that he can only have heard from Laura. Someone needs to investigate him. I think he sold Nathan and I to her. He looked grim. I've told you before, that's a very strong accusation to make. I glared at him. Would you arrange a music recording contract and a TV appearance for someone you were forcing into witness protection? He laughed. Shit, no. That'd be stupid. What's the point of witness protection if you're not going to hide the witness? It'd be like telling the people that want to kill you exactly where to find you. He stared at me, realization hitting hard. Keep copies of everything. Get Nathan to do the same. I took a deep breath. I'll give Nathan a copy of everything I gave Mott too. And other people have copies. Just in case. And then I'll go into witness protection and hope to hide. I paused, not wanting to consider that Mott was right about Nathan's feelings for me. Is it true that Nathan's been offered full operative training and a 5-year contract? And he won't be able to contact me while he's working for Asio? Naveed shrugged. I have no idea. Applications are handled in Canberra. If he has and you disappear, it's true that we aren't permitted to consort with contacts, witnesses and suspects outside of standard work arrangements. You won't see or hear from him, especially if you're in witness protection. He glanced at me. You should ask Nathan about that. I shook my head. No. Nathan has no idea I know who he works for, and I think he prefers it that way. Mott's going to negotiate that with Nathan. He said. Nathan will take the job. Naveed snorted. And you believed him? I didn't say anything. I wanted to believe that Mott was a blatant liar as well as a bastard, but I also wanted to believe that Nathan had been operating under his orders, until he disobeyed them to help me. Only Nathan could tell me the truth. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. 79. As Naveed pulled out of the driveway, I called Joe. Jason answered instead. Just who I wanted to speak to, he drawled, as I thought the opposite. How long before you think you can play? We'll lose our Frio gig if you can't in 2 weeks. A gig in Fremantle won't last long, I replied impatiently. I've arranged us a recording contract and a live performance in Melbourne next Friday. I need to talk to Joe and we need to book flights, accommodation. You got us a recording contract? How? Jason shrieked. Give me that, Joe demanded, and her voice grew louder. Caitlin. Why does Jason seem to think we have a recording contract? We don't yet, but we will by next week, I replied. Part of the interview that's airing next week. It's a long story, but it's true. We'll sort out the contract details next Friday morning, and we have a live TV appearance scheduled for that evening in Melbourne. If all goes to plan, we'll spend the following week recording our first album." "I don't believe it," she admitted. "How?" "I can't really say," I hedged. "I wondered if my phone was tapped. Come over and we can discuss the details. We also have to book the flights." "I'll be right over," she responded. "Bye." 15 minutes later, she was indeed over, and I was able to show her Mott's email, confirming what I'd told her, including the name of the label we were apparently signing with. She reread the email twice, shaking her head. "I thought you'd have to sleep with, kill or blackmail someone to get a contract like this, but you did all three." I forced a smile. "I should have discussed the terms with you and Jason first, but this is a better contract than we'd get any other way. Do you think you'll be able to go to Melbourne next week?" She laughed. "I've already rung work to take the time off. We need to get you some new clothes before we do anything else. Melbourne shopping is just what you need. I think we should leave tomorrow if we can." The last bastard would have to wait. If he turned up at all, he might be sitting under a rock somewhere, where slimy things like him hide. "Okay," I replied, my heart feeling lighter. "You're not bringing Nathan, are you?" "I'm not dragging him shopping," she said. I hadn't even thought about Nathan. I tried to hide my shock. "I haven't even mentioned it to him. It's not like I'll need him in Melbourne." I swallowed, suddenly feeling very alone. Witness protection might feel just as lonely if Nathan chose his career over me and his own health. "Cool. Let's head up to the travel agents and sort out our flights and accommodation." 80. Ambulance shots road police blood Nathan numb. Blood blossomed on Nathan's shoulder, painting a red flower on the chest of his shirt. He looked horrified. I threw myself on top of him, knocking him over, so both of us lay flat on the road. My breath caught in my throat. Was he shot in the heart or lungs? I wanted to pull off his shirt and check the damage, but getting my weird, twisted, numb hands to grasp his shirt was hard to do. "Don't leave me," I told him raggedly. He gaped like a fish out of water. His mouth moved but no words came out. "Please, not his heart or lungs. Please don't let me watch this man die for helping me." After a few moments, he made an effort to speak. "It's all right." He forced the words out. He said something else, but it was drowned out by the shouting behind him, between the police officer on the ground and two of his colleagues. They made him hand over his weapon, pinning him to the ground like some kind of criminal. "You shot the man who helped me, you bastard." Nathan's shirt was saturated with blood. I'd never felt more helpless, unable to help myself or this wounded man. This man I desperately didn't want to die. I needed him alive. My voice was hoarse, partly from emotion and partly from shouting earlier. "You said you'd never let them hurt me again. You promised." He just stared back at me, agony on his face. I tried to shift his shirt clear of the wound, so I could see where he'd been shot, but my hands wouldn't cooperate. He pulled my hand away from his shirt, looking sad. "Please?" I began, shifting off him and back onto my knees. I touched my fingers to the road to steady myself, then realized that the road was wet and my hands were damaged, so I lifted my hand away, but it came away red. Fresh blood pooling on the road. How could he lose so much blood and stay conscious? The world slid sideways and went dark. 81. I debated whether to tell Nathan about the trip, the contract and the new life I'd be living in Melbourne, then realized I couldn't. His boss was supposed to make the offer to him and he might not have said anything yet. Part of witness protection was not telling anyone. I couldn't even tell Nathan. Fate had other ideas. Detective McGinnis called, asking for both my memories and my ability to identify my attackers. Apparently someone had noticed suspicious activity near an old World War II bunker in some bushland down south. When the local police had gone in to investigate, they'd found dead bodies and evidence of someone being held captive in one of the bunker chambers, so they'd called him in. He didn't need to say it. I already knew he'd found where they'd held me. A forgotten war bunker, which had probably seen no violence or action until my advent. Hopefully it never would again. His voice went all funny as he said they'd had some help from ASIO in identifying what were apparently terror suspects. Did I still have that ASIO operative watching my every move? I wondered how to tell him that Nathan was with me, without letting Nathan know I knew who he worked for. Just put me on speakerphone so he can hear me, the detective said after a moment, probably guessing my dilemma. I let him repeat a much abridged version of the story he'd told me, followed by an urgent entreaty to identify the bodies on Monday. No, not Monday. I'd be in Melbourne. I stammered an excuse without saying where I'd be. Tomorrow, maybe? I suggested. We have a relative coming in at 2, so maybe, at 3? Would that be too late for you? It's probably best that you don't meet him, especially if you identify his son as one of the men who... My money was on Simon. The last remaining bastard. I swore to pack a knife. I'd stabbed him once and this time I'd make sure it was fatal. He'd feared me from the start and so he fucking should. My eyes darted to Nathan, silently asking him if he'd help me tie up this one last loose end. He nodded as if he understood completely. A man who'd kill for me. Could anyone ask for more? I'd miss him in Melbourne and every day if he chose to stay here instead of come with me. Could I blame him for choosing his career over me, a girl so damaged I didn't know if I'd ever be right again? I held out hope all the same. Life had been cruel enough to me lately, maybe I did deserve to have a heart and some kindness, after all that had come my way. One more man to kill, and my bad luck would end. 82. I checked the CD before I gave it to Detective McGinnis. He shot strange glances at Nathan, like he suspected more than either of us told him, but he didn't say it outright. Then he pulled out pictures of the bastards, all of them taken in what I recognized as my house. I identified the pictures as best I could, but this was one time the perpetual darkness was far from my friend. I'd never seen some of their faces, Simon included. I knew their voices and hands in the dark, but dead men had neither voices nor sexual preferences. I looked long and hard at the police officer who'd shot Nathan, who he said had also shot at me. I hoped he was the son Simon had spoken of, and I hoped that Simon was here. I wondered if he was one of the people I'd seen earlier, but I hadn't recognized any voices. I needed him to speak before I could kill him. When we headed out into the car park, I despaired of seeing him. Maybe Simon was hiding far from my reach. I'd brought the knife for nothing and I'd never be safe. Excuse me. 2 words that both froze me and made my day. I saw the gun pointed at Nathan. He aimed it too high for me to be his target, as he said, "You killed my son. Give me the girl." I don't know what you're talking about. Nathan protested. I do. I slipped the knife from its sheath in my sleeve, feeling the hard handle in my palm. He kept the gun aimed at Nathan as he repeated, "Give me the girl." Let me do this, I murmured to Nathan, hoping he'd pull out his weapon if I needed him to. I detached Nathan's arm from mine with some difficulty and strode forward. It's not the girl you'll get, but what she wants to give you. No, don't hurt her. Nathan sounded like Chris all over again. The idiot kept his gun pointed at Nathan over my shoulder. You killed my son, he whimpered. I had no sympathy for him. This bastard had almost killed me, and so had his prick of a son. No. Nathan killed him for me. And he'll kill you too if you so much as look at me wrong. But I owe you something. Something I promised if you ever touched me again. I jabbed low and hard, putting my full weight behind the blow. I felt the blade sink deep into his groin. I yanked it out again. Now, you dickless bastard, I can keep stabbing you until you die of your wounds, or you can take the easy way out. You so much as touch me and Nathan will shoot you. For me. I saw the fear in his eyes. Fear and pain. I almost felt pity, but then I remembered. He hadn't even had the guts to see the same in my eyes as he raped me in the dark. I watched impassively as he stuck his gun in his own mouth and ended his misery. Good riddance, Simon, I spat. I turned to Nathan, more relieved than I could say. Now it's over and I'm safe. I relaxed in his arms before I realized what time it was. I have to get to the airport, Nathan. He looked from me to Simon's body and back to me, stammering the start of several sentences but not finishing a single one. I didn't have time for him to make an excuse or explain to me what he'd hidden. Wishing I didn't have to, I said gently, "You have friends to call to clean this up. That's what they're good at, isn't it? Tell them you have the last one." I wanted to kiss the shocked look from his face and tell him everything, but I didn't dare. When I got back from Melbourne, after Mott had made my offer, when maybe Nathan would agree to come with me. I need to get to the airport. May I borrow your car? I'll leave it at my house, with the keys on the table inside the front door. You know where I keep the spare house keys. You can get a lift with your colleagues, right? He didn't want to stay and deal with the mess. He wanted to come with me, but he couldn't. Not yet. Maybe. My heart hoped. He gave me his keys and I remembered the CD I'd wrapped in the printout for him. On every page I hadn't given to the police, I'd written as much, so he'd know what I had and hadn't told anyone. I didn't tell him about the copy I'd given to Mott, if it still existed. Crooked Mott might have destroyed it already. In the papers I'd told him how to meet me too, if he wanted to see me again, one last time before I left for good. When he could tell me what his answer was to Mott's offer. As I drove away, I couldn't take my eyes off his reflection in my rearview mirror. I wanted him to choose me. 83. Our first morning in Melbourne, Joe told me, "I'm not sharing a room with you anymore. You thrash around so much in your sleep, and you even screamed a couple of times. I'd rather share a room with Jason, and the last time I did that, I found another girl asleep in my bed one night. I'm sorry, but I just can't." I nodded silently. I understood. I didn't know how Nathan had managed to stay in the same room as me when I had nightmares. "Will talking about it help?" she asked timidly. "Can you tell me anything about your ordeal?" I stared at my best friend. It had never occurred to me to tell her about the horrors I'd seen, though I'd easily have told her anything before it. But I couldn't burden her with the knowledge no one should have. Nor did she need to know I'd killed people. Nathan knowing was bad enough. "No, Joe. They hurt me and you don't want to know." "Does Nathan know?" she demanded, snatching up the room keycard as we headed downstairs for breakfast. In the mirrored lift, it was hard to avoid her eyes. Vague details of most of it, yes. There are some things I just can't tell anybody. I found her staring at me. He really didn't do it, did he? I mean, if he had, he'd know everything already. "Joe," I warned her. Her hands flew up in surrender. "Fine. Forgive me for maligning your sleazy boyfriend. Jason's going to be heartbroken when he finds out you're sleeping with Nathan instead of him. You know he's had a crush on you since high school. Nathan's not so sleazy." We haven't. I can't yet. One day, maybe. I tried to keep my head down to hide my blush as we entered the hotel restaurant. Joe gave the waitress our room number and we followed her to a table. I walked around the breakfast buffet avoiding her, but I loaded my plate up quickly and had to return to the table. But you want to, she said, lifting her cup of coffee to her lips. With my mouth full of strawberry yogurt, I nodded emphatically. After breakfast, we asked the hotel and managed to upgrade our room into an apartment, though we paid for the privilege. As we headed to the first shop on Joe's long list, she interrogated me on style. Are you trying to match the look from the TV interview, or are you going for the complete opposite? Do you want people to recognize you? What did you wear for the interview? She demanded. I explained the minimal makeup and modest, mulberry-colored dress I'd worn to the interview. For the interview, they made me into a delicate little doll, someone to be rescued by a hero. If I'm trying to hide in plain sight, I need something completely different. Joe laughed. More realistic, you mean? If you're a doll, you're made of Kevlar. I wished for my Not an Angel t-shirt that I'd worn the day they took me, but that was long gone. It did give me an idea, though. Didn't the newspaper articles describe me as an angel? Joe snorted. Yeah, the absent angel. Like you were just going to waltz back into life. Some really stupid journalist came up with that one. I glanced around and there was no one within earshot. I still kept my voice low. Did you know that all of my kidnappers have conveniently turned up dead? Joe glanced at me. That hasn't made the news. I gave a tight little smile. No, nor will it. That's confidential, something ASIO and the police are keeping quiet. Now she didn't look at me at all. How do you know? Did you? I've seen the bodies, I replied honestly, my tone flat. Well, I'd say the angel of death is really into you too. Your Nathan had better watch out. I laughed a little. Consort to the angel of death, or the angel of death herself. Black's a good color for a musician, I say we go with it. Caitlin, the angel of death? I'm not going to be able to keep a straight face. I shook my head slowly. No. I'll have a new name. I won't be able to use mine anymore. Hesitantly, I told her the new name I'd need to get used to. That sounds familiar, though. Isn't that another girl who was in the news last year? The one who died, she asked, worried. Spelled differently, but yes, I admitted. Shouldn't the angel of death have the name of a dead girl? Joe lost it laughing. A reincarnated dead girl, consort to the angel of death. She's going to have one hell of an afterlife. Starting with a live TV performance of her band song, I replied. She laughed harder. What if we hit it big? I mean, we won't, but we could. An afterlife as a rock star. I summoned a smile. There are worse things. I tried not to think about such things, though. Today was not a time to be sad, when the future seemed so bright. A new name and the prospect of a new life, new clothes seemed like very little in comparison. I hadn't counted on Joe's lust to replace my entire wardrobe, though. The second night, after I'd closed the door of my lonely room, I slipped the sheathed, cleaned knife from my bag to beneath my pillow. I slept with the light on and wished Nathan was beside me. The interview check had cleared, so I had more money than I was used to for clothes. I was glad we'd arranged extra luggage for the trip home. I had double my luggage allowance after 3 days of shopping. I hoped Joe would quit soon. I wanted to see more of Melbourne. I'd heard that they had a really good zoo, plus I wanted to practice for our Friday performance. Jason flew in on Thursday morning, asking happily who he got to share a room with. Joe sweetly told him he had the couch. I heard her pull him aside and warn him not to make the slightest come on to me, for fear of his life. The rest of the day we spent rehearsing Necessary Evil, my new song. Joe had insisted, I'd been pleased, and Jason didn't dare argue. I caught him humming the quirky chorus a few times at dinner, which meant it was catchy enough to stick in his head. I hoped it'd have the same effect on other people when they saw our live TV appearance the following night. If not, we'd be wasting our time and my money in the recording studio next week. That night I locked my bedroom door and made sure the knife stayed under my pillow in easy reach. Jason tried the door after Joe had gone to sleep, but the lock held. Every night I missed Nathan, counting the days till I could go home. If he did his training in Canberra while I lived in Melbourne, surely I could still see him. It was only a few hours' drive. We'd make it work if he wanted. Please, Nathan. I want you to want me. 84. Can I call you Jay? Tell me a bit about your band. I've never heard of you before, and this is my first interview. I used to do the weather for the news before today tonight, the girl positively gushed. I touched up my dark lipstick, my equally dark smile keeping the makeup artists at bay. I was still getting used to the gothic-style makeup, but it seemed to be effective. They'd been advertising my interview with Nathan all week, with shots of me smiling and looking scared. Some of the ads talked up the mystery man from the newspaper, a big question mark over Nathan's blurred photograph. If anyone was going to recognize me, surely it was the network's own staff. Miss. I regarded the wardrobe supervisor without speaking. Do you need any assistance with makeup or wardrobe? They're waiting for you in Studio 3. I nodded. This will be fine. I glanced at Jason, who was still flirting with the anchor girl. I can't wait to hear it, she said with a giggle. I wondered if there was an IQ test for news anchors. Surely the girl couldn't be as stupid as she sounded. No one could be. With one final spritz of Joe's hair, her makeup artist smiled. All ready to go. A black-clad man gave me feelings of déjà vu as he gestured the way to the studio. I stalked forward, regretting the combat boots Joe had talked me into. They were a nightmare to walk in. I consoled myself with the thought that I could kick a hole in any man's groin while wearing the platform-soled, knee-high monstrosities. Fuck you, boots. After so many hours of playing this song to heal my hands, I could barely wait for Joe to set the beat before I launched into the intro. Jason sang better than he had in any of our rehearsals, only one tiny mistake, which even I barely noticed. Perhaps it was the little fangirl of a news anchor he kept winking at throughout the performance. She squealed as she applauded at the end. I felt sick just watching her, but she completely ignored me. She had eyes and ears only for Jay, and for one more wink she'd probably give him the rest of her body too. Joe and I had a coffee in the green room afterwards, watching Jason's interview on the screens. The flirty bastard looked like he was ready to jump the poor girl on the interview couch, cameras rolling and all. He ended the interview with a showy kiss to her hand, like something out of a romance novel. She fanned herself with her other hand as if he gave her the vapors. She was too young for it to be hot flushes. Looks like you have competition, Joe said softly. I looked at her in disbelief. Joe, you know I don't want your brother. She looked pained. I know you keep saying that, but somehow I figured that one day you'd change your mind. He's not a bad person, and he's been obsessed with you since he met you back in primary school. I shook my head. Maybe that's the way it would have been, but things are different now. I'll never be the same, and I'll never be happy with Jason. I looked at her sad expression and winked. Come on, if I loved both Nathan and Jason, we'd have one of those fucked up love triangle things that only happen in books. This is real life, not a story for teenagers. We're adults, but we're still teenagers, she pointed out. I shifted uncomfortably. Yeah, but... Come on you two, after all that playing I need a shower, Jason interrupted, a cheerful grin on his face as he hefted his guitar case. The rest of our gear was packed into the trolley he pushed in front of him. So, did you get her phone number? I asked nastily. Jason looked smug. Yep. Phone number, a date for tonight, and an offer to stay at her place when she heard you were making me sleep on a couch. He seemed uncertain at my shock. I'll cancel if you promise to come instead. Jason's smile crept back. Yeah, pun intended. I considered the offer. I really did. He meant it. No, Jason. You have a great night and we'll see you tomorrow sometime. I meant it too. I didn't see him tomorrow. Neither Joe nor I saw him for 3 days until we reached Tullamarine Airport, just before our flight home to Perth. He looked like he hadn't slept much, but he didn't look upset about it either. The studio got thousands of messages after our performance, he told us as we lined up to check in. They recognized me. I'd never play live again. Shit. Did people like our song that much? Joe asked brightly. Mostly they liked me, Jason admitted proudly. The rest of them hated Paige. They said some really horrible stuff about her. And most of them were teenagers. Paige? The girl I met at the TV studio. The one who interviewed us, Jason explained. He turned red. The next One Direction. Oh fuck. I started to laugh. Way to go, Jason. You're the cream of the jailbait fangirls if they're sending death threats to your girlfriend. He didn't look so happy after that. If life were like a book, I'd have felt jealous, surely. Instead, I simply shrugged. As long as they buy the CD, the fangirls are all yours, Jason. We'll put a photo of you on the cover. I'd had enough media exposure to last a lifetime. Jason was welcome to it, fans included. 85. We arrived early, so we both took a seat in the back of the church to watch the wedding. All the family seemed to be the grooms and there were no bridesmaids, just a grumpy little flower girl, dressed up like a doll-sized version of her mother. I envied the bride her beauty and her breasts, her happiness and her loving husband. Those boobs are huge. I bet he can't wait to get her out of her wedding dress, Jason whispered loudly. I glared at him but didn't say anything. Please rise to welcome Mr. and Mrs. Fisher, the priest called out, and I rose along with the Fishers' invited guests. As the couple passed out of the church, her eyes met mine. Hers held sympathy for my sadness, as if she knew me and she shared similar pain. She inclined her head to me and I responded in kind. Then she turned away, stepping into the sunlight outside with her new husband. I remained in the darkness, where I belonged. I kept checking my watch as 4:30 approached, wondering if I should have told Nathan to meet me in the church instead of just giving him the address. A church on a Saturday afternoon meant weddings like the one I'd just witnessed. I didn't want to give him the wrong idea. Marriage wasn't what I had in mind. Do you think the boobs were real? Jason asked in a normal voice, now we were alone in the church. Weren't you going to go to reconciliation? I replied, irritated. I should never have told him about my meeting with Nathan. What, and desert you before your boyfriend turns up to break up with you? I'm here to keep you company and be your moral support. A shoulder to cry on and all that shit. His wicked smile didn't charm me anymore. He just wanted to see me say goodbye to Nathan, I was sure. From the shadows I could see the wedding party outside, taking photographs on the steps. Movement on the footpath drew my attention and I moved into the foyer for a closer look. Nathan scanned the wedding guests as if looking for me. The anguish on his face told me more than anything else he could say. He'd made his decision and he was going to hurt me for the first time. I froze, not wanting to move. I wanted to remain in the dark and not know the truth, if only for a few moments more. He stepped inside from daylight to darkness, and he didn't seem to see me standing at his side. I reached for his hand, hoping it wouldn't be the last time. He pulled back as if the contact was unwelcome, splashing his hand into the holy water font. I helped him cross himself with the water, babbling about baptism and other things I'd learned in religious education at school. I wasn't sure I believed in any religion anymore. Not my mother's Islam, nor Dad's Catholicism. Feeling shaky already, I made some excuse to lead Nathan deeper into the church so I could sit down. Years of Catholic schooling had trained me well though, and I dropped to my knees instead of sitting in the pew. Once down, I didn't want to rise. Eventually my babbling died as I ran down. I glanced at Jason. He bowed his head as if in prayer, letting his long hair fall forward to hide the gleeful smile on his face. His hair was longer than mine. He looked like a ranger out of a Tolkien novel, instead of my sleazy lead singer. "Fuck off," I mouthed at him. This conversation was hard enough without an audience. Ceremoniously, he ascended from his genuflection to march down the aisle, piously keeping his eyes on the stained glass behind the altar. I didn't say a word until he'd closed the door of the confessional behind him. Now alone with Nathan, I still couldn't bring myself to ask him, and start the conversation I dreaded would end in goodbye. Once more, Nathan came to my rescue. "Caitlin, I'm so sorry." I turned to see he knelt beside me. "Chris." I hadn't said the name aloud since that night in the toilet, but it held more meaning than any name should. I summoned all my courage. I needed to know. "Why did you do it, Nathan?" It was my job to watch them kidnap someone and get out with the witness. But I didn't know what they'd done to you until that night on the beach. Then it was too late. I'd let them hurt you like that, and I hadn't done a thing to stop them. It was his job. He did it to protect his sister. He wasn't a bad person, he'd simply been ordered to let fucked up things happen. But how far did orders go? "Why did you kill him?" I asked next. Was that orders too? Or was that when you decided to try and make up for what you'd done? I pressed my lips together so I didn't ask the other burning questions. I thought it was for Alana, or even for me. Maybe it was for you. I just couldn't let him live, knowing what he did and what I didn't. How I'd failed. You ended it for me and for your own conscience. Now for the general knowledge question. We both know the answer, but are you the super sleazy interrogator or the honest man I trust? Why me, Nathan? Why did they choose me? I couldn't take my eyes off you, he whispered as he stared at the floor. I couldn't stop them. He swayed as if he was trying to rock away his pain. I pitied him. I'd seen his anguish before, but it was worse now that he knew everything I'd been through. I never should have given him the account of what they did to me. You helped me recover from it. You even saved my life. Maybe one day. I thought of the happy couple I'd seen earlier and hoped he couldn't see my blush. I tried to say something else, but I couldn't think of anything. I'll be able to. I forgive you for it. There. I'd said it. Absolution, Nathan. Don't feel guilty about me. You've paid for your sins against me and I forgive you. Now you can go and further your career like you want to without feeling you owe me anything, anymore. Oh fuck, now I was going to cry. I lurched to my feet and ran out of the church, furiously blinking the tears away. I heard his footsteps behind me, but I didn't stop until I was certain I had my eyes under control. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I knew he'd take the job. Even if he did care for me, he wouldn't put his life on hold for me anymore. I reminded him too much of his mistakes. And when did he ever pay attention to his own health? It's not like he'd even mentioned the nightmares to me. I looked up at him and permitted myself one last indulgence. I might never get to do this again. After today, I'd probably never see him again. I kissed him. The passion in that one kiss was more powerful than any I'd witnessed during the wedding this afternoon, but our only witness was Jason, rapidly walking away because he didn't want to watch. I broke the kiss, forcing myself to step back. Goodbye, Nathan. I turned and drove my feet away from him. I love you, Caitlin. His voice held desperation. But not enough to stay with me. I know. My voice died to a whisper and I couldn't turn to face him. Under better circumstances, I think I could have loved you too. Liar. It didn't matter what he'd done. I loved him and I wanted him to choose me. To fight for me one more time. I forced myself to keep walking, every step a necessary effort. Tears streamed down my cheeks, but I didn't dare stop. I made it to the side door of the pub before I gave in to them properly, sobbing my heart out for a few minutes where no one could see me. I couldn't face Jason right now. Joe and Jason were waiting. It was time to go back to work, I told myself, straightening up and wiping the tears away with my hands. I slipped into the toilets out the back to wash and dry my face, hoping I looked normal. I locked myself in a toilet cubicle to get changed. I slid the white dress down to puddle at my feet, and pulled on the tightly fitted black dress that I reminded myself was a work uniform. I kept the knife sheathed at my thigh, within easy reach yet still hidden from view. The boots were next, something Joe had gloatingly called new rocks, all black leather and metal. Then I slid on the feathered black wings Joe had bought me in a costume store. The angel of death indeed. I washed and dried my face again, just in case, and put on enough eye makeup to masquerade as a panda. Real cute, but one swipe and I'd take your head off. I carefully painted my lips the color of Venus blood. The effect was dark and disturbing. The girl in the mirror looked like a stranger to me. I smiled and my reflection looked sinister, like she was planning to kill me slowly or take off with the contents of my bank account. Or tell the man who'd saved her life and killed for her that he didn't deserve her, so she could walk away from his rejection with her dignity intact. As if he hadn't smashed her heart. The smile vanished. I stuffed my other clothes and makeup into my bag quickly, before I left the toilets and went in the pub's back door. As I crossed the half-full pub, there was no sign of recognition from the beer-sipping denizens. Who would mistake the innocent little victim they'd seen on TV for the vengeful dark angel stalking across the room? No one. Jason had set up the equipment already when I reached the stage. He looked relieved to see me, his easy smile lifting his lips. Damn, you look like the angel of death. You can fuck me to death any night you want to name. Fuck off, Jason. Find yourself a fangirl to fondle you after the gig. Caitlin. He grabbed my arm, his voice low and urgent. I'd be good to you. I'd show you a heaps better time than that crazy perverted prick. He was a necessary evil while you were recovering, but now I... He stopped when he felt the cold hard blade against his balls. You don't need your balls to sing? I asked sweetly. Just think of all the high notes you'll hit if you ever touch me without my permission again. Or if you ever say another word about Nathan. As far as I'm concerned, the necessary evil in my life is you, for the duration of this recording contract. I hid the blade with my sleeve as I tucked it away again. He didn't need to know that he'd only felt the sheath and not the blade itself. You won't be the first bloke I've castrated either. And I sleep with that knife. Do your job and you can have all the fangirls you like afterwards. His eyes widened in something like fear. Perhaps the gothic makeup had its uses, after all. Or maybe it was Laura's knife. My knife now. Let's kick off with a cover of Nobody Sees. The duet we practiced, I told him. I sat behind the keyboard as he started with just his guitar, his solo of the first verse. It was Jason's voice I heard, but my thoughts were of Nathan. My heart felt shattered at the thought of what I'd said and done today, however necessary. I closed my eyes as I started singing the second verse. Who will be there at the end? It's over. I heard the words he spoke in my memory as I realized it was over. This was the end of it. My voice failed and Jason sang the chorus alone. He repeated it, drawing it out to give me a minute to get it together. I shook my head, put the pain into my voice, and I found it helped. Fall down at your feet? He repeated the line until I remembered I was supposed to stand up. The final time he dropped to his knees in front of me, just vocals with no guitar for the last chorus. I looked down at Jason for a second before he stood up again and launched into another Powderfinger song, the upbeat one that we always followed this with. Jo sat at her drums, smiling encouragingly at me. I hadn't seen her there until she started playing. Nobody got to see my heart break. Damn right. I returned her smile. This be our last gig in Fremantle. Next week we'd fly back to Melbourne and hope something would come out of the new contract. Jo and Jason launched into Necessary Evil and I allowed myself to smile. I wasn't going to lose it on this one, I'd sing it the whole way through, my heart in every note. For Nathan. For me. For the necessary evil and my hope that one day I'd truly be free. 86. I found the papers in my bag the next morning, under the clothes I'd stuffed into it when I got changed for the gig. The writing on the first page was Nathan's and it was rough. I started writing down my nightmares too. I thought you should know. The pages beneath were all word processed, a printout of something he'd typed. I sat down and read it. Normal nightmares are never this clear and constant. I only close my eyes and I'm there again, so real it's heartbreaking. And I can never change what happens, no matter how much I want to. Mike found me first. Here, he said as he threw something to me. I caught it without thinking. I recognized the keys to my car and looked at him, wanting to ask why he'd given me the keys back, when I was on my way to see her. You'll need the car to dump the body when you're done with her. One more fuck and you'll wear her out. He grinned. Don't let that stop you. She's better alive than dead. I didn't bother to reply. It was late at night and without the moon it would have been pitch black outside the house. I wondered if she was awake yet. I walked faster through the bush than usual, taking the steps into the old underground bunker 2 at a time. I crossed what I thought was the weapon storage room and slowly opened the door to the sleep quarters, not bothering to shut it behind me. I could hear her labored breathing telling me where she was, but I couldn't see her in the gloom. My toes brushed something and I fell to my knees, feeling for her with my hands. My hands touched bare skin, she was so cold. She moaned at my touch, then started coughing. I tried to find her a blanket in the dark, but I couldn't. Even the mattress was gone. While she still slept, I wanted to go get her another blanket from the house. Maybe a quilt too, I decided. After all, it wasn't like I couldn't spare mine. Quickly and quietly, I made my way back to the house, grabbed the quilt, then headed to the cupboard where the extra blankets were kept. I bundled the quilt into my arms and grabbed the top 2 blankets. I detoured by the kitchen on the way back, switching on the light. I opened the fridge and wished I'd asked them to pick up some extra food for Caitlin. I grabbed a can of Coke from the box on the bench and raised my hand to turn off the light. There was a smear of blood on the light switch. I looked down to see 2 bloody handprints on my quilt. I turned my hands over, dreading what I knew I'd find. Traces of her blood stained my hands. No. I screamed in my head, knowing that my mouth was open but I couldn't make a sound. Can't let her die. Have to help her. To hell with everything else. I shoved the coke in my pocket, tightening my arms around the blankets and quilt. I ran all the way back to her. I set the quilt down beside her and she barely stirred. She was cold and asleep, which gave me the idea of trying to smuggle her out as a corpse as she slept. After all, Mike expected me to kill her tonight. I gave her the last pills I had left, to make sure she'd sleep until I could get her to hospital. Desperately I prayed my crazy plan would work, so I could save both her and Chris. Then I tried to wrap her in the quilt, thinking to cover her face as if she really was a corpse. The quilt almost smothered her, so I took it off her and wrapped her in the blankets instead. Focusing on her even breathing on my shoulder, reminding myself with every step that I had to keep her alive, keep her breathing, I cradled her blanket-wrapped body and carried her to the car. I laid her carefully across the back seat, closing the door as quietly as I could, before I slid in behind the steering wheel. I drove to the beach, to the spot I always drove to, where they'd found Alana and I'd never find peace. I knew she had to get to hospital as soon as possible, but this was my only chance at pulling this off. Protecting her and my sister. Once I'd failed to obey my orders and stop them from taking her, Mott's next orders were clear. Tail them until they dumped the body and catch them on the way out. Catch them, keep Chris safe, and keep Caitlin alive. I didn't think I could succeed in all three, but I had to try. I'd take 2 out of 3, the most important 2. To hell with the rest. I forced myself to park the car and take the keys out of the ignition. I clenched my hands on the steering wheel and took a deep breath. When my exhalation emptied my lungs, I shoved the door open and stood up. I slammed my door shut and opened the one behind it. She looked as if she hadn't moved at all during the short drive. I leaned over to check on her before I touched her. I could hear her breathing, which sounded wheezy, as if she had a cough or worse. I remember desperately wanting to take her to hospital now, to shut the door, get back in the car and drive as quickly as I could. I lifted her out of the car and carried her to the beach. I laid her on the sand, still wrapped in the blankets. I realized that I'd left my phone in the car, so I went back to get it, bringing back the first aid kit from the car too, little good though it might be. I switched the phone on for the first time in weeks and rang an ambulance, telling them I'd found a girl lying unconscious on the beach. Then I rang the police and told them the same thing. Only I told the police it was my fault. I took the scissors from the first aid kit and tried to cut through the rope around her wrists, but they were too caked in dried blood. I looked for something to wipe it away with and came up with a bottle of disinfectant, a couple of vials of saline and some gauze. Dousing the gauze in the disinfectant, I hesitated. "I'm sorry, Caitlin, this will hurt, but I need to do it to free your hands," I told her, wincing as I touched the gauze to her wrist. She didn't react, even when I poured the remaining disinfectant over her hands and wrists, and I realized why. She couldn't feel her hands, the rope was cutting off her circulation, or she was too cold. I hacked at the rope with the scissors again, and I felt the strands part. When I pulled the rope away, her hands stayed in the twisted position they'd been tied in. I tried to massage some blood back into her poor hands, but I stopped as I realized that her hands were twisted because her fingers were broken. Shaken, I sat back for a second, trying to work out what to do next. It was too dark to see clearly, the crescent moon visible between clouds, then hidden again. I needed to wake her up, I decided, so that she could tell me where she was injured. Why there was so much blood. No, first I needed to cut her free. I sawed at the rope around her legs. This was cleaner, without the blood coating, so it was the work of barely a moment to free her completely. "Wake up, Angel. Now you're free." I'm not sure if I just thought it, or if I said it aloud. I poured the contents of the bottle of saline onto a bandage and started washing her face, willing her to wake up. She stirred at the cold touch, and I tried to reassure her. I thought I heard a car door slam back on the road. I left her to walk back to the road, to see if the ambulance had arrived, but there was no one there, just my car. I walked up and down the road a bit, looking but saw nothing and no one. So I headed back to her. Too late. I could see their silhouettes in the moonlight, her lying on the sand, him crouching next to her or on top of her, I couldn't say. By the time I was close enough to tell, he'd stood up and started walking to meet me. She just lay there not moving, and I could feel my heart freeze as I wondered if she was already dead. She can't be, she can't be. I mumbled to myself, forcing my legs to keep trudging toward them. Are you listening? He hissed. I knew he'd been speaking already, but I never heard it, so I can't remember it. I said if you want her, now's your last chance. She doesn't fight as much anymore. May as well do her before you kill her. Some ancient instinct stirred at the thought, I'm ashamed to admit, and more besides. Traitor, I thought, willing it to go down as I trudged across the beach to where she lay, naked on the sand. Mike tossed me his gun and I almost missed it. My palms were sweaty and the gun threatened to slip out of my hand onto the sand, though I clutched at it like a lifeline. You can do this, I muttered aloud to myself. As though he'd heard, Mike called out, Go on, Chris. Oh, and give her a little kiss to wake her up, before you stick it in her. My eyes on her, I registered dully that, shining in the moonlight, there was a slick of fresh blood on her thighs from what he'd done to her before I got here. I'd reached her by then. There was no need to wake her up, her eyes stared blankly at the sky. I fell to my knees beside her and still she didn't move. The ice in my heart spread throughout my body as I thought, oh my God, she's already dead. I leaned over, cupped her cheek in my free hand, closed my eyes and kissed her cold lips. I was so stunned I barely felt her icy fingers on the gun in my hand, forcing it slowly up. I sat up, jolted by the thought that she was still alive, barely registering that she'd made me bring the gun up to her face, where she held the barrel to her forehead. Do it, she rasped, holding the barrel firmly in her twisted fingers. Her eyes still stared up at the sky, not at me. No longer blank, now they were full of pain and anguish and defeat. I've had enough pain. Give me death. Please. Before the pain comes back. Her eyes begged me now, dark pools in her face that seemed to drag me in, eyes that I wanted to see laughing, defiant, even crying, anything but this, like twin black holes pulling on my heart. End it. Her fingers crept up the gun, but she didn't have the strength to move the trigger. My heart dropped to new depths of despair. I'd promised her I wouldn't let them hurt her again, yet it had happened twice. I owed her more than I could ever repay. I couldn't let her die by his hand or hers. Or mine. Mike's voice came from behind me, coming closer. Want me to show you how to do it? Sure, this one's even better than your sister was. I wonder how good the other one will be. If her eyes were black holes, I felt like a sun about to go nova. My eyes held hers as I rose to my feet, wrenching the gun from her fingers. I heard the snap of bone as she cried out in pain. A heart-wrenching sound that would haunt me later, but I felt almost numb to it at the time. End it, I thought. I swung around and shot him point blank in the chest where his heart should have been. Then again in the head, over and over, till the gun was empty and he had to be dead as he slumped onto the sand. I lowered the gun and walked over to him. I pulled his shirt over his head, though it was already covered in blood, and gained more in the process, and checked for a pulse. Dead after all this time, finally dead. I spat on his corpse and carried the shirt he didn't need any more back to her. She was barely conscious and so cold she wasn't even shivering, as I struggled to put the bloody shirt on her. It might have reached her knees had she the strength to stand, but I doubted she'd manage that tonight. I opened my jacket, then slid an arm under her shoulders to help her sit up. I held a blanket against her back as I wrapped my arms around her, trying to share my body warmth. She slumped against me as I called her name over and over, urging her to wake up. Why? The nightmares aren't as bad, she grumbled finally, her eyes still closed. I could have cried, I could have kissed her, I could have danced with her all along the beach, because in my head I was almost singing, she's conscious, and if I can keep her that way, till she's warm she's going to live and I won't have killed her, I won't. One less crime on my conscience tonight. Instead, I replied, "It's over. They're not going to hurt you again." She gave a breathy snort of laughter. "Promise?" Her tone was wistful, though she also sounded resigned to hearing a no. The only way I could make sure I hadn't killed her was to keep her alive. "I swear I'll never let them hurt you, ever again." "Then you'll have to kill them all," she said. "Because they won't let me live. Or you either. We can identify them." "It doesn't matter," I replied. "We'll say I did it. I hurt you. You'll go to hospital and my sister will be safe. I'll get arrested. Go to prison. And it'll be okay." I became aware of something in my pocket. Reaching in, I pulled out the forgotten can of Coke. I cracked it open and took a mouthful before I pushed the can to her lips. "Drink this. It's Coke. The sugar'll give you some energy." She opened her eyes, looking bewildered, before she took a sip. I held the can for her, gun in one hand, can in the other, as she drank, until she'd finished it. When it was empty, I dropped it on the sand, not caring about anything but her. "You need to warm up. You're too cold," I told her, wrapping the blanket tighter around her, pulling her closer to me. "Stay with me, Angel. You need to stay awake till you're warm. Tell me about your family." "Caitlin," she mumbled. She was still sleepy from the pills. Pills I shouldn't have given her, I realize now, too late. "Caitlin. My name is Caitlin." "I know," I replied softly. "You didn't want me to." "My friend. You saved my life. That makes you my friend. You can't call me by my name." She coughed violently and rested her head against me. "Sure, Angel." "Caitlin," I corrected. "It'll take some getting used to. Is it okay if I occasionally call you Angel too?" She nodded slowly, her body growing heavier as she drowsed. But I couldn't let her sleep. Not yet. I repeated my question. "Tell me about your family. The people who'll be really relieved to see you very soon." I was patient. What else did I have to do but keep her awake and help her get warm until the ambulance came? "I don't have much family. My mother died when I was very little, I don't remember her. There's just my father and he works away so much on contracts that I don't know if he'll even know I've been gone." Her voice faded and I tried to think of something else to ask her to keep her talking, but my mind was blank when she suddenly asked, "What day is it? I mean the date?" I had to think a moment, then checked my watch. "It's the 31st of July. She let out a wordless exclamation, then swallowed. After a few moments, she spoke again. "Then the semester started. I'll be so behind." I fought down a laugh. Just like Alana, her first thoughts were to her studies. Not how long those bastards had her, not how many days till her birthday, how many days she was into the semester. My blank mind coalesced into a question. "What are you studying?" "Medicine." She started coughing. I automatically tried to pull the blanket tighter around her, my mind suddenly anything but blank. Full of questions, I didn't know which one to ask first. "How old are you? Did you know Alana? Why did I never see you there?" What would a normal person ask first? "How long have you been studying that?" I tried to ask casually, but I found I was gritting my teeth. "1 semester," she croaked, her throat still sounding raw from all the coughing. So she started after. I took a year off. She couldn't have known Alana. I wouldn't have seen her. That'd make her around 18. "What made you choose medicine?" I asked. She cleared her throat twice before the words came out in her voice. "Someone told me once that it helped them feel better just because I was there. I remember feeling useless and wishing I knew enough to be able to do something more material to help them. I went and got my first aid certificate, but it wasn't enough. I wanted to be a doctor because one day I could save someone's life, and that makes it all worth it. She continued speaking, but I didn't hear it. The voice I heard was Alana's. What if after all my study I could save someone's life? How could you want to do anything less if it meant someone could die if you didn't do everything you could? Don't let her die. Keep her alive. I became aware of the faint sound of sirens coming closer as I realized Caitlin had fallen silent, her head coming to rest on my chest. Stay with me, Caitlin. You can't sleep yet, I warned her. She raised her head. Tell me about you instead, she mumbled. I don't know anything about you, not even your real name, nothing except that you finally want to help me. Pity you're not a doctor. That night I wished I was a doctor, how much she'd never know. I tried to laugh it off. I'm dull and boring. If I tell you about me, I'll put you to sleep. Maybe later, when you're warm and having trouble getting to sleep. So tired. She yawned. It's hard to imagine having trouble getting to sleep. It's too hard trying to stay awake. Tell me something interesting about you, something that will help me stay awake. I hesitated, opened my mouth to say something even as I didn't know what to say. I'll tell you my real name when you're safe in hospital, I lied. Hang on until then, and I swear I'll tell you anything you want to know. I wouldn't be allowed to go with her to hospital. I was about to be arrested. Okay, she began grudgingly, but... Red and blue flashing lights lit up the beach. People in police uniform came spilling out of the dunes, shouting incoherently, as I strained to hear her finish what she'd tried to say. It's all right, Angel, I said softly. The police are here. They'll take the vicious, raping bastard away and you'll be safe. Her reaction was the opposite of what I'd expected. She clutched at me, her arms suddenly around me under my jacket. No. They'll find a way to kill us. If you leave me alone, they'll hurt me again. They won't want to leave witnesses. Don't leave me. You promised. Fuck. My whole plan lay in tatters. She was right, of course. They'd kill us. Maybe if I killed myself they'd leave her alone, and, no. The only way to keep her alive was to stay with her. Oh God, I called the fucking police. In a move that could get her killed. I pulled her closer, unconsciously tightening my grip on the gun as they fanned out to encircle us, stopping several meters away. Great. Now thanks to the sirens, he's got a gun and a hostage. Now what? A voice lamented. Her raspy breathing became more rapid. I had no hostage, she couldn't feel her legs, let alone walk, and the gun was useless, empty. My brain raced her breathing, the gun by her throat. I lifted the gun into the air and started to pull back the trigger, to show them that it wasn't loaded, and they backed away a bit. Don't kill her, one of them breathed, more in disbelief than to me. Kill her? I couldn't do it, not even when she begged me to. I stood up slowly, cradling her body in my arms, trying to keep the blankets around her. This gave one of them the cue he needed to start giving orders. Put the girl down and step away from her, hands in the air. No, she whimpered, her face white with pain and effort as she wrapped her arms clumsily around my neck. The blanket slid away from her chest, exposing her blood-soaked shirt. I only held her tighter. Get her an ambulance. She needs help. She's badly hurt, I'll put her down only in an ambulance. I could hear one hiss to the other, she's bleeding badly, look at her shirt. Let him get her back to the road, then. He lowered his voice so I couldn't hear the rest, but I could guess, then we get him. I was beyond caring. I want to get her to hospital. She needs help, there's so much blood, I repeated much louder. There's an ambulance back at the road. You can take her there, a voice called back. I took a step forward and they took more steps back. 1 step forward, 2 steps back, like some kind of deadly dance through sand dunes that shifted and presented a pale backdrop to the real drama, like unwilling spectators. To say nothing of the unwilling participants. Back on the road, bathed in the blinking red-blue-purple light from the patrol cars, was the promised ambulance, glowing like a beacon in the weird light show. It had one door open and ambulance officers standing by, like a chauffeured limousine, ready to take care of her every need. I laid her carefully on the stretcher. In the bright harsh light of the ambulance, I saw for the first time what they'd done to her, what I'd done to her, in letting them hurt her. Every bit of her skin that I could see was a mess of bruises and fresh and dried blood. Mike's bloodied shirt hardly helped matters, but it probably hid far worse injuries than those I could already see. You let them do this, I told myself, trying to hide my horror as I covered her up with a hospital-issue blanket. Scared to do anything that might hurt her further, I forced myself to reassure her as she looked at me pleadingly. I touched her hair briefly and smiled as best I could as I voiced my desperate hope. You're going to be all right. And with an effort she smiled back. I drank in the sight of her. Surely saving this amazing girl's life counted for something in the overall scheme of things. Deep in my gut, I dreaded she was right and I was going to die soon. I wished I'd left some bullets in the gun. I could have used one to end the uncertainty. Somebody behind me roughly took my arm, saying something about a few questions, and started pulling me back out of the ambulance. I stared at her in shock as she reached out for me with a hand on which all of the fingers were definitely broken, bones protruding through her skin in ways that were far from normal. Just like Alana's had been. As I focused on her hand, for a moment it wasn't her face I saw behind it, but Alana's. Not alive, but as dead as she'd been when I identified her in the mortuary. Like a zombie, risen from the dead to make me pay for my negligence. You don't get to die today. You still have work to do. I was too stunned to resist as I followed my arm out of the ambulance and back onto the road. An ambulance officer climbed in then and hid her from sight. Reluctantly, I turned away. You're in no shape to drive. I'll give you a lift to the hospital. The sympathetic voice belonged to a police officer who looked almost 30, Senior Constable Nick Dennis, his uniform said. He gestured toward one of the patrol cars. Aren't you going to arrest me? I asked dully. Just get in the car, he said. As long as you cooperate, I won't need to yet. He opened the rear door. My bum had barely touched the seat before I heard raised voices. I jumped up, trying to see what was happening. He turned his head toward the noise, his body blocking the doorway as he started to close the door. You should have shot her while you had the chance. I froze with one leg sticking out of the car. No, not Caitlin. They paid off a police officer, and he'd shoot me as soon as we got on the road. Caitlin, her time would come later. The ambulance officers? The nurses? The doctor? Oh God. I threw my weight against the door. It flew open, knocking the crooked cop aside for a second, and I saw Caitlin crouched at the door of the ambulance, where she wasn't supposed to be. He took advantage of my distraction, trying to push me back inside his car, but the crack as my fist met his jaw sent him to the ground. Once he was out my way, I ran to her. She'd climbed out of the ambulance and started staggering toward me, arms outstretched. The image of a zombie, a walking corpse, an image I'd never get out of my mind. I swore softly under my breath, she had a death wish, this girl I had to keep alive. And I couldn't live with myself if I let her die the way Alana had. I could hear the police officer on the ground shouting something at me, but I wasn't paying attention, so I didn't turn around to look, just kept running toward her. No, she screamed as sickeningly she stumbled and her legs gave way beneath her. She fell to her knees in the gravel. She would have pitched forward face first had I not dived forward to reach her before the rest of her body hit the ground. Her weight pushed me down onto the road. Pain burned across my shoulder as she screamed again and more blood flowed down her leg. The echo of the shots resounded in the cold air. I opened my mouth to tell her how stupid, but those tortured eyes could have shut up even the most garrulous politician. She sobbed helplessly, drenched in tears, shaking so violently she had trouble getting the words out. "Don't leave me. She's been shot." The cop was aiming for me but shot her instead. "It's my fault she's been shot." The thought registered and I forgot anything else. "It's all right. I wasn't leaving you." I tried to stem the stream of blood with my hands. The torment and the pain in her eyes. Under that lurked raw terror. "Never hurt again. You promised." God, she'd been right. Her terror at being alone and helpless again had driven her to find me. She barely had the strength to stand and it had almost killed her. I knew she'd kill herself before she'd let them hurt her again, if I wasn't there to stop her. And I'd let her get shot. Her twisted fingers clutched at my shirt, scrabbling at the gun in my pocket. Oh God, she was going to try and shoot herself again. "Chris. Please." Her eyes were on fire in pain. Still she didn't let go. "I'll never let them hurt you again. If I have to stay with you every waking moment until you recover. You'll never have to remind me again. And I won't let you hurt yourself either." I peeled her fingers from my shirt. She gasped, squeezing her eyes shut, and her body went limp. Her blood tainted my hands once more, but she was only unconscious. I carried her back to the ambulance and laid her down again, dimly aware of the other police officers pushing the handcuffed senior constable Dennis into the back seat of his own patrol car. The car he'd almost killed me in. I sat beside her in the ambulance this time as the paramedic returned to take care of her. Squeezing past, he didn't spare me a glance as he sat beside me. He pulled out a stack of dressing packs from the cupboard above her and tossed one to me. "Here, press down hard with that. It should slow the bleeding." I stared at the dressing in my hands, confused. "You need me to help you?" "No, but it'd be nice if you didn't bleed to death while I'm taking care of her. She's lost too much blood already." I looked at him, more puzzled than ever, and he took pity on me. "You've been shot, Rambo. There's blood all down your arm." At the bottom of the last typed page, Nathan's handwriting was almost illegible, but the words were carved deep into the paper and underlined. "I'm sorry." I ripped the pages into pieces and dropped them into the kitchen bin, on top of the mushy, moldy remains of some tomatoes I'd left in the fridge before I went to Melbourne. As I carried the rubbish bag to the wheelie bin outside, I wondered at his stupidity in writing it all down. What if someone had found it? After all the trouble we both took, to hide the truth from the police and everyone else, as I'd promised I would, did he think I'd forgotten? Horrible memories, carved into my mind deeper than any knife could? I dragged the wheelie bin to the curb, hoping the rubbish truck wouldn't be too long. I needed Nathan's compromising evidence to disappear as quickly as possible. Then I went to my bedroom and started packing my things, so I could fly away and leave all this behind to start my new life with a new name. There could be no looking back. After all, however sorry he might be, he didn't want me. This has been Necessary Evil of Nathan Miller. Book 2 in the Nightmares Trilogy. Written by Demelza Carlton. Autonarrated by AI Charlotte from Google.